Hey everybody, welcome to the Payments Podium. I'm the Payments Professor, Kevin Olson, and today I have Ian McAllister with me. He is the COO of Unit21. Ian, I want to welcome you to the Payments Podium today.
Thanks, Kevin. Always wanted to be on. Big fan.
All right, well, I got to tell you, being on here, big fan. I know you know the question that's coming. This question I ask everybody who comes on here. How in the world did you get started in the world of electronic payments? Because we all know nobody is sitting in their kindergarten class going, I want to work in electronic payments, especially you. I mean, you're an electronic payments fraud. So what led you down the path to get started in electronic payments?
Get rid of my suits working at a large bank. So I worked at Wells Fargo for 14 years, did a bunch of stuff there, and then bounced out and threw on my jeans and fintech outfit to work for Clear Exchange, which was the predecessor to Zelle back about 10 years ago. So that kind of started it all.
Okay, so working at large banks. So you really did, do I guess I call it the traditional path. For those, a lot of people listening, come to me and say, how did you get to certain places in electronic banking, especially fraud? Fraud's a real popular place. You did some of the more traditional through the what do we call it, the halls of banking, working with Wells Fargo, I guess you could say. But how did you end up getting to the world of fraud? Because I mean, that's a big area to get into.
Yeah. So when I was at Clear Exchange is like, again, the predecessor to Zelle. It's kind of the technology that helps route the right payment. So it's like a messaging system, but they didn't really have any fraud capabilities. So they were like working with banks. Banks had their own fraud. But then what they did, the bank, it was owned by banks, and what they did was they merged us with a company called Early Warning, which is a 35-plus-year-old company that's just been in payment fraud, identity fraud, like authentication fraud, that kind of stuff for years. And so they put us together, and that started off the process of me being in the world of fraud, was working with this OG consortium, Early Warning.
Okay, when we say fraud though today, fraud is so many different things. In fact, I know you were at Money 2020 here recently. I saw you there. And we're at Money 2020 and I'm hearing AI and fraud, AI and fraud, AI and fraud. I mean, I couldn't walk 5 feet with AI and fraud, it seemed like. And I know at Unit 21, you guys are doing so much when it comes to fraud. What would you really say today, though, are like the top trends, the top things that you're seeing when it comes to fraud and payments?
Well, you're like a real time payments guy, right? So it's like it's real time for sure. It's like being, because a lot of the fraud stuff, a lot of the fraud controls that existed out there for years were based on like ACH or other type of kind of fraud vectors that allow for kind of slower controls. But now everything's around real time, and so what we're hearing a lot from prospects and our clients is like, how do you have a fraud platform like Unit21 that can like do real-time monitoring, real-time fraud detection, real-time interdiction into payments? That's really continues to be an issue that plagues the industry a little bit. That's
Okay,
one.
now hold on. See, here's one of the things I hear right away.
Yeah.
When it comes to instant payments, people tell me that means you're going to have instant fraud. In fact, people are telling me because the payments are so fast, you can't control the fraud. There's no way to monitor for it. The payment's too fast. That you got to go with the slow payments because slow payments are the only way to be able to monitor the fraud. So what do you say to that?
Everyone's been saying like instant payments, instant fraud for like 10 years, and I think, look, people have been trying to fight against like this fraud trend for a long time. But I mean, early on when we launched Zelle, like there are people like, again, people that have worked in banks and worked in building fraud controls forever. And the way they approached it was like similar to how Unit21 does it, which is like you look at a bunch of different signals. You look at like the payment, you look at the identity of the person, you look at like what they've done on their mobile device. Have they changed their password? Have they done things that are out of bounds that trigger kind of an alert that there's going to be somebody who's like a fraudster? And we think of the same way at Unit21. Like we look at a bunch of different data when we look at our real-time monitoring. It's like, did somebody change their password? Did they log in from a different IP? So I think there's different ways to approach it, which, the fraud has gotten more sophisticated, but so have the controls. And it all does come down to like data and the ability to like react in real time.
Okay, so I hear that. You're looking at multiple data points.
Yeah.
It's not just the singular thing. I mean, again, I've been around for a long time doing this, and I remember that it used to just be, oh, just, have multi-factor authentication and you're going to be all right. That's all you got to do. Well, there's no doubt that is not enough anymore. You got to look at multiple things. But the other thing that I'm hearing, though, is, do you have enough time to look at it? That's one of the big concerns that a lot of the financial institutions that I talk to is they're saying these payments have to move so fast. There's not enough time to look at all those different data points. How are we going to be able to protect our account holders? So I get that you can look at all that stuff, but is there enough time to look at all that stuff? Especially if it's sending or receiving, because there's different requirements on both sides.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, you're right. Like the old way was like hold the payment. It's like don't give funds until you have secured the settlement of like an ACH, and that totally makes sense. And by the way, those hold strategies still exist today. People still use them today. So it really depends on the use case. But with things like Zelle or instant payments, where like it's a credit push out, yeah, you have to make those decisions real fast. And that's why we like when we think about like real-time monitoring, we try to do it in sub-seconds, right? Like less than 250 milliseconds, such that the user experience isn't interrupted for the good payments. And for the ones that there's a risk, you can slow those down. You can throw roadblocks, like you said, multi-factor. You can say, hey, a lot of banks throw up like, call in, or we're not gonna submit this payment. So I think the technology itself is actually sped up too to be able to create that real time response. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things too is like you've mentioned Zelle, and I'm already seeing it with RTP and FedNow. A lot of times, and I wonder if you see this too, a lot of times what happens is you can do all this screening, and you do the screening and it's a good transaction. And afterwards, the consumer comes in and says it's fraud. And what really happened is the consumer got tricked into sending the payment. They got, I would say, conned into sending the payment. There's no indicator to be able to stop somebody from sending money because they got tricked into it, when all the indicators, all the data points tell us it's a good payment that they want to send and intend to send. What are we supposed to do to stop somebody from sending money they want to send if all the indicators are good indicators? I really don't know how to stop something like that. And I think that's where we have a really big hurdle to go over, when what you've done is everything you're supposed to do. So I think that's a big hurdle for us. And I don't know if there's an answer to that one.
Yes, scams aren't going away. Look, I mean, I sent my dad and my whole family on a text string last week because my dad sent me a note about sending him money, and I sent it to everyone. I'm like, Dad, this isn't you, is it? And he's like, no, it's not. So it's like it's that phishing, it's that scam. So like it happens everywhere. Unfortunately, it's like it's gotten a lot more prolific. Like we just did a big study, like the state of fraud and AML, where we asked a bunch of different questions of like hundreds of industry experts. And scams continues to grow. And what we're seeing is, phishing is for sure like the number one across bank, credit unions, and fintechs. But we're also seeing things like romance fraud and money mule scams and elder abuse. Those are really things that are alarming to the industry and also growing. So year on year, and it's really about creating education. Like Zelle's been doing this for years. It's like creating education for the consumers, where they actually implemented things like, hey, you've never sent to Kevin before. Are you sure you want to send to Kevin? Are you and asking those questions, almost putting like these user experience, stop gates for people. So just to create awareness. But yeah, scams continues to grow, and we're seeing it in the industry, and we're seeing it in the responses.
All right, you actually said a lot I got questions about. Number one, that study. I think your marketing team told me something about that study recently too. Can I find that on the Unit21 website, or is there somewhere I could go get more to learn about that study? Is it out there? Would I be able to learn more if I go out there?
Look at that. By the way, I'll give you my kickback cash for saying that, for sure. Yeah, it's at unit21.ai. It's also all over LinkedIn. So if you look at my LinkedIn or Unit21's LinkedIn page. You can take a look. But it's yeah, I mean, we're seeing a lot of different trends. I mentioned real time monitoring or like real time aspect of fraud, the scams. There's a bunch of other vectors within the fraud that continue to increase too. It's like check fraud. Um, account takeover is one of the largest costly aspects of running a fraud program for credit unions and banks. So there's a lot of information in there just to see kind of what the recent trends are. And it's our third edition, so it's the third year in a row we've done this, which is really interesting to see how the trends are changing. We're actually
Okay,
staying.
well, I geek out on studies. I
Yeah,
do, and I know a lot of my followers do, and a lot of my friends because we give a lot of different presentations. My buddies, like we were just talking about our friend PTAP, and we need that data when we're going up and talking in front of people. And
right.
so, when you mentioned it's your third edition, would I be able to get the previous editions? Because I love to be able to do year to year comparisons. And also, when you mentioned check fraud, one of the big things I see too, since you're doing this real time monitoring, do you see that the fact is there's probably more check fraud than there is real-time payments fraud happening? And that's where the big focus is people saying, hey, you got to stop all this instant payments fraud, when the reality is there's far more check fraud taking place than there is instant payments fraud.
Yeah, the we are. I mean, the volumes, like you said, it's just a volume game. It's a game of large numbers. I mean, checks have been around forever, and real time payments. I think the fraud is around scams. Like that's what everyone's worried about. But checks continue to be a bane of the fraud existence of these banks. I actually did another shout out. I did a webinar a few months ago on check fraud, which was really interesting, where we dug into the different vectors of how people exploit kind of the check fraud industry. It's like stealing checks from the mail houses of the world. It's having these keys that they can create, universal keys that they can get access to a bunch of different mailboxes. It's the ability to like leverage when you steal these, you leverage different resources, like people who need money. You pay them to do a bunch of uh, sorting of all the mail that you stole. So it's like really interesting that it's the industry of check fraud has just proliferated for sure.
Okay, Ian, where can people get that? Because I am a huge promoter of education on the Payments Professor site. Okay, full disclosure, yes, some of the courses you got to purchase, but there are also free courses. The YouTube site, there are definitely free videos. Is there any way, especially if it's free, people can go get that webinar to be able to learn more? Because I definitely am a huge promoter, like I said, of education, and check fraud is getting out of control. And you mentioned a couple of things that are key when it comes to check fraud. People need to know it's physically happening. There are really gangs of people that are working to make this happen. The universal keys, the working together to make this happen. It is scary what's really going on there.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at our own website. So it's the Unit21, and there's a resource center that we have that we host all of our webinars and all of our content there. And that's really kind of our goal, is not to provide you kind of like basic content. We're actually trying to create like educational content. I mean, one thing I learned at Early Warning was like Early Warning is owned by a bunch of banks, and banks compete, right? They want more consumers. Usually they have a lot of Venn diagram overlap. But when it comes to fraud and scams and protecting the industry, like they collaborate very, very well. And we kind of take that same approach at Unit21, where, we've launched our own fraud consortium a couple of years ago, which we're really proud of. We have over 60 members. We have close to 50 million identities in there. So we're really excited about just like the growth, but it does represent this, like we're an industry. If you work in fraud and AML, which Unit21 does, you want to bring people in to help actually reduce fraud across the industry and make payments safer, and also make it safer for consumers and businesses to do business. And so like a lot of our content is really focused on that, is education, awareness, trends, where people can like download and then make investment decisions based on like where they want to invest for fraud controls and AML controls. So that's really our goal versus just kind of like basic content. So yeah, excited. Yeah, our marketing team, just a quick shout, has done an amazing job.
Yeah, and see, I'm a fan of the education. Everybody's got to get the education all the way down to the end users too. the consumers, the businesses that are the ones writing the checks, the ones that are making the payments. And I think it's also important to note something both of us have been saying: scams and fraud. And there is a difference between fraud and a scam taking place. And another resource, everybody out there watching, listening, the fedpaymentsimprovement.org. I've mentioned it on shows and podcasts and videos before. There's what's called the fraud classifier and the scam classifier. You can go get at fedpaymentsimprovement.org. I would highly recommend. Something else I want to ask about too, when it comes to what financial institutions are looking for, let's focus more on fraud. And I like to stay there when it comes to the instant payments discussion. When we're looking at indicators of fraud, and especially in instant payments, are there any, like, let's say, top indicators, certain things that this says more likely it's fraud than this? What are those key types of indicators that financial institutions should be monitoring for? I know one of them you said is, hey, you're sending payments to Kevin. I mean, I think you said first time sending to Kevin, though, that, it's the first time you're sending to him. What are those types of key indicators they should be monitoring for?
Yeah. So when we work with banks and credit unions, we not only work with them, we work with like their core providers, so their transactional providers. We also work with their front ends, so like all these digital fronts, like your mobile app for your bank. And that's kind of critical because you get a lot of data around what the consumer, like I said, like what the consumer is operating. And so being able to say, yeah, is this transaction one out of bounds? Like you look at historical transactions and it's like, is it just out of bounds? Are you sending it to somebody new? Are you sending a dollar amount that you usually don't send? Are you sending rapid transactions? Like those are all really critical. And by the way, doing that like in real time, monitoring that in real time, is really hard. Like it's hard for technology to do that all in sub 250 milliseconds. But that's why that's what's important is looking at those out of bound type of transactions. I mentioned some of the data like IP address changes. It's, are you in a different zip code because you have geolocation on your mobile app? Like looking at those different attributes of not only just the payment transaction, which I said out of bounds and dollar amount, but also just like what's the other information that you can pull around the identity or the experience that the consumer is going through. That's all, and you have to do all of that really, really fast. And those are all good indicators if you should be slowing down a payment or stopping a payment or throwing up, a multi-factor, all that kind of stuff.
You know what I actually heard in that is it wasn't so much of, well, you are looking at different things, but I heard strategy on how to look at things. Because you said, hey, we look at the core. You said, we're looking at the back end, we're looking at the front end, we're working with the front line, we're working with the mobile app. So it's really taken a strategy of looking universally at everywhere of where the payment's coming in or going out, and then applying those different indicators. So is it taking that, that more universal umbrella holistic approach to take on, hey, everywhere, every nook and cranny of where this payment might be touched, to be able to apply that view for where fraud might be happening?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's like the triangulation of like the point of view of like what this looks like. And again, it's more complicated than just like the transaction amount, which is historically what people relied on. It's like, is this thing in or out of bounds? And then if it's out of bounds, just wait for it to settle. That's on an ACH. That doesn't work on real-time payments. And so you really have to get more sophisticated with who are the entities that you work with, right? Like we spend a lot of time not only working with our clients, but who are their vendors and partners that can help bring data into Unit21 so we can help create that holistic view for sure.
Okay, here's something else. What are the things that banks and credit unions, I guess, overlook? Now, because I know sometimes, we all have our expertise. There are all things that we are good at. I am definitely one of those. I love reading rules and regulations. It's weird. I get it. You give me a regulation and I'm happy, man. I will sit down. I will devour that thing. I will tear it apart. But if you sit me down and you tell me I have to set up a camera configuration, no, I got a guy for that. Yeah, I know I do all these YouTube videos and stuff like that, but I got a guy who comes in, sets up my cameras for me. Thank you, Jeff. I know you're probably watching this video going, yeah, it would be blurry and out of focus if I wouldn't here for you. And that's what I do. So basically what I'm getting to is I got somebody who helps me with that. And I know when it comes to banks and credit unions, they're really good at what they do as far as providing financial services. So what are the things that maybe you, as being the experts in the fraud spectrum and being able to help them, what are the things that they maybe overlook that you can come in and tell them, you really should be looking at this. This is what you need to look at, maybe like when we mentioned strategy, when you look at indicators, when you look at putting a solid plan together for protecting their account holders that they're not doing, that you see that they're not doing, they should be considering.
Yeah. By the way, I know you read those regs 'cause I read your ODFI fraud requirements that just got launched by Nacha. So good on you. The So a couple of things. One is the speed of data. So how quickly can you get information from those partners? So one thing that we're seeing is banks and credit unions are dependent on partners where it's like a day later, like they get the data a day later to evaluate fraud. That's a day too late, right? It's like it's like way too late. So one is like how quickly can you get the data? I think it's really critical to be able to like for systems to consume the data in real time, create a decision in real time. That's a big technological gap. Two is, and some of this is within that same study, the state of fraud and AML, is that like how quickly can they react to fraud trends? So how quickly can they, if they see a fraud trend, build, backtest, and deploy a rule? And what we've heard is over like a third of banks and credit unions combined take like a month. If they see a fraud trend and they have a strategy they want to deploy, they have to either work externally with their vendor to be able to build a rule, backtest, and deploy it over a month. Like
A month?
Yeah, it was actually quite alarming. It was something that Donna Turner and I talked about on a webinar a couple of weeks ago. Just like that is just an exposure that fraudsters will know and will see and will exploit for sure. And so working with organizations that you can build rules really quickly and deploy fast is critical. So that's like two big things. And then also just like, are you creating awareness within? This is another one around the check fraud, which was interesting. Was one of our clients at Service Credit Union in New Hampshire. It's like, how do you create education for your frontline so they are really good at being that first line of defense against fraudsters? And that can be, your frontline can be your teller system, it can be your back office ops person, it could be your call center folks. And those are like all really critical in thinking about a general strategies. How quickly can you get the data? When you see a trend, how quickly can you deploy controls? And then also, how do you have like the other more qualitative controls, like level 1 controls, built into your infrastructure? And that's sometimes just people and education.
Yeah, I agree with that because I know I jokingly said one day, how do you teach a frontline person to identify a bad check if they've never written a check? But it's a real, challenge. It really is, but it's something that's got to be done. Here's another question, another end of the spectrum. What's the future of fraud look like? I mean, like I said, in Money 2020, all I heard was AI fraud, AI fraud, AI fraud. What does the future of fraud really look like? If you pull out your crystal ball, what do you think it's going to be look like? I mean, let's just go a year from now. What do you think is going to be happening?
Oh, man, I think I mean, I hate to say it, it's the same question like AI. Like, how do you predict what AI looks like, a year from now? A year ago, I don't think anybody could have predicted where we are today. I think the aspect of fraud, which is alarming to us, is like, again, I talked about the data, the transaction kind of triangulation, but like where I'm not seeing, where we like sometimes I get nervous about is like, how is AI going to proliferate scams? So again, I think that's where a lot of the concern is. Like Kevin, I don't know, maybe you're AI right now, to be honest with you. Maybe you are.
AI can't create this craziness. It's good, but not that good yet.
AI doesn't do bow ties like you do. But I would say, like, how does AI actually help help the fraudsters in scamming. Like it's scary, right? Like it gets very bespoke to the person being scammed, and that's really scary. And especially as somebody who has elder parents, like how does AI actually create this artificial perspective that they're gonna lean into a scam, something that's scamming. What I would say is what we're interested around, we have like AI within our platform to do a couple of things. One is to help like the investigators get faster at what they do. So like if there's a bunch of data and there's an investigator, like there's potential fraud or financial crime for AML, how can AI actually pull a lot of that information together to create a point of view of like this is or isn't fraud? And so using things like LLMs to pull in a lot of data and then create a narrative for somebody to quickly make a decision if something's fraud. So like speeding up the controls. Secondly, is something that we're really interested in is like the rules that we have in our system. What type of rules work for this entity that we can then tweak and actually apply for another entity that's within our client portfolio? Like being a vendor that actually can help not just like have a technology solution, but have recommendations to organizations such that they can defend against potential fraud vectors is really critical to how we're thinking about our strategy too. So AI, like yes, like it's going to proliferate scams and like create different vectors, but also like how do banks work together to leverage AI in a like a thoughtful way that doesn't break, all of their data security concerns, but like in a way that actually makes their fraud controls faster.
I like that. And I think we'll actually see that. I think you've nailed the prediction right there. All right. Last question I got for you, Ian. You've had a heck of a career. I mean, starting off with Wells Fargo, working with Zelle, working with Early Warning, working to get Plaid going. I mean, that's a major company right there. To now be with Unit 21. A lot of people that follow the Payments Professor, they'll come to me and they'll say, "What do I need to do to be successful in this world of electronic banking? What is the advice that you would give somebody, that you would tell somebody who wants to have a successful career? What are the things that basically you've done, or that you would tell somebody who wants to have a successful career in this industry? What would you tell them that they need to do to be, I mean, basically follow in your footsteps, or the things that you've done to be successful?"
By the way, I'm going to show this to my 17-year-old daughter, so she thinks I'm cool. But no, but seriously, like, I mean, I was a traditional banker for a long time. I did a bunch of different stuff: consumer lending, corporate risk, corporate development, all that kind of stuff. And then just I leaned into a new technology. Like it was something very, very new. Real time payments was something that was new in 2014 to banks. Like it really didn't exist. And so one is I felt I was very opportunistic to lean into a something that was newer in the industry, but also tangential to what I was already doing, like working with banks. And then two is, look, I got the benefit of working for some really great people. People at Early Warning had been in the industry and were part of building a new thing for the industry. So like people like Luann Alexander, Paul Finch, Eric Woodward, Don Turner. Like these are people that worked at these large organizations. And then I was able to tuck in and help them build something new. That was pretty cool. And so sometimes you look at organizations and you're like, they're doing something amazing. But you know what? When you work for a company that actually has somebody who's done this before too, and you can combine new technology with kind of like somebody who's actually built some like infrastructure in the past, that's kind of a magic moment. And I had the benefit of doing that. So I would just say, look, don't just look at the technology and where people are going, look at the leaders of that organization for sure.
Man, I love that answer. I'm with you. Looking for those opportunities. Look for those people who are willing to take those opportunities you can learn from and go for it. Ian, thank you for being on the Payments Podium today. And for all those of you out there listening, it's Ian McAllister with Unit 21. You can find him on LinkedIn. You can find him over at Unit 21 AI, right? Unit21.ai, is that correct?
That's right, sir.
Absolutely. And that webinar is out there too. You can also find that study that's out there too. I'm the Payments Professor, Kevin Olson. And if there's somebody you think that needs to be on the Payments Podium, email me, kevin@paymentsprofessor.com. Or if there's a topic you'd like to have addressed, email me, and I'll do my best to make sure that that topic or that person gets on the Payments Podium. Otherwise, for today, I got to say, class dismissed.